Hello and welcome to Tell Us Your Effing Story, a BDC Partners podcast. BDC is a leading retail and advisory firm. Our podcast, we go behind the scenes with some of the leaders in the franchising industry. I'm your host, Bruce McFarlane, co-host John Sully, and today with Jamie Keyzer, the CEO of Floorworld. Welcome, Jamie.
Jamie, tell us your fucking story.
Okay, it's franchising story, Jamie. We don't worry about John. He's the wrong element.
I'm the expletive man.
So we're going to go a little bit back before we start talking about your franchising story. We're going to hear a little bit more about your story. And, you know, as a kid, where'd you grow up? What did you enjoy to do? You know, right back in the day, what was fun for you?
Well, it was fun for me. So good morning, guys. Thank you so much for having me this morning. It's
Pleasure.
great to be here with
Couple
you.
of false starts too, didn't we? We got you here.
Here eventually. I was travelling or doing something, so it's nice to be
Playing
here
golf
with you guys.
or, you know.
Yeah, I think so. Some corporate days and whatever else. So golf is part of my younger story though. So look, grew up in Berwick in the southeastern suburbs of Melbourne.
Oh, you're close.
So
you haven't moved far, have you?
No, I haven't. Always been a Berwick boy. Went to Berwick High School, lived a couple of 100 metres from the school, so that was good. Look, I think, you know, in my youth, most of my time was spent, and I talk about it a lot at the moment with my 15-year-old, just how different things are now to what they were, dare I say it, 35 years ago. You know, for me growing up, it was go to school and then it was go and spend time with mates, you know. The old story I think everybody talks about is, you know, you get on your bike after school and you ride the streets until the street lights come on and then it's time to go home.
Bit hilly, just Berwick though, up and down
where
hills.
I was okay. I was at the bottom of the hill on the other side of the Berwick Hill, so it wasn't too bad. Riding and walking to school though was a little bit of a different story.
Yeah.
You know, when you go to school at a school that's built on a hill. I remember I spent 7 weeks on crutches when I was in year 7 and had to get up and down, you know, 10, 15, 20 stairs in a flight all around the school. That wasn't too much fun. And then started playing golf at a young age as well, got into golf with my brother. Still love it today. You know, I'm teaching my son how to play golf as well.
You a member of the course as a kid when you were little? Or?
I was.
Yeah,
I was a member of Montuna, which is in Guys Hill, which is just out the back of Beacon Hills.
Yeah.
So Montuna Golf Club when I was a kid, I was a member there because back then, right, membership fees were really cheap. I think it was $50 as a kid's membership, and probably a couple of $100 as an adult. So
did your mum and dad play? How did you get into that?
No, my brother got into it, and then I sort of followed him. But you know, same old story. We used to get the buggy and the clubs and stick them on the back of the bike, and you know we'd ride 5Ks to the golf course, you know, to go and play a game of golf because you know mum was busy or dad was busy or whatever it was. You know, I grew up in a single parent family for a little while with my mum, so you know she was always busy because I was one of 4 kids. I was number 3 or 4, so you know she was always busy doing something. So if we wanted to play golf, we had to jump on the bike and ride 5Ks, talk about a couple of hills. There's a couple of hills around there too on the way to the golf course. So but loved it and still love it today. You know, I'm a very patient golfer. I've never thrown a golf club in my life. A few expletives, but never thrown a golf club.
We'll take you out with John one day.
Sure, no worries.
It's nasty. I've got a video. I'll show you later.
No worries.
So where do you play now? Whereabouts are you?
I live in Pakenham now, so not far from home.
Yeah.
So I lived there for sort of more than 20 years. And yeah, we normally play at Pakenham. My in-laws live down on the Mornington Peninsula. Not far from where you guys are, not far from your office. They're just down in Rosebud West or Capel Sound as it is now. Apparently the house prices went up when they changed the name. So we normally play, because I play with my son and he's still learning, we normally just play at the Cups.
So he hasn't beaten you yet. That's the...
No, well, it's interesting, right? And you talk about today's generation and like 5 minutes after he started playing, he's like, Dad, I just don't understand why I can't drive it as far as you. I'm like, well, you got to remember I've been playing for 40 years. You know, it takes practice, it takes time. Yeah, but why not? You know, it's that mentality now of, you know, of teenagers today that I need everything like this. You know, because everything's instant now, whether it's online or whether it's on your smartphone or whatever it was, which is very different, you know, to when we were kids.
I was pretty keen to beat my old man at golf and tennis and stuff back in the day.
I think he wants to. His goal though is just to be taller than me.
Oh, right.
So he's like, Dad, all I want to be is 188.1 because I'm 188. He's like, I just want to be 188.1.
Love it.
I think he's at about 160 now.
Is he going to beat you?
15.
Did you do those measurement things where when they're
we've
two
got it all
or
marked on the wall, but I don't know the calculation of what it looks like. But that's his goal in life, is to be taller than me. Because, of course, my wife's 5'2". So she's only short. So he got her about 12, 18 months ago.
Yeah.
So lucky he didn't.
Yeah, but whether he got her genes or yours, like at 188,
he's somewhere in the middle.
He'd be hoping to, you know.
Yeah.
190.
Yeah, that's all we want.
What's that? What's 188? Is that 6 foot?
6'3".
Yeah.
6'3". Yeah, somewhere around
So did you play footy as a kid at 6'3"?
No, I didn't. No, I didn't play footy. Didn't play basketball.
God, had a bit of height.
Yeah.
Playing golf,
just
big
enjoyed,
levers.
Yeah, just enjoyed playing golf. And if not, I was playing table tennis or pool with mates at their houses or something. So,
that's great.
So yeah.
And what about as school? You know, what subjects did you enjoy? You know, what did you think when I want to grow up, I want to be an astronaut or?
Well, close. It was something to do with air travel. I did, like I think most kids, I wanted to be a pilot.
Yeah.
When I grew up, that's what I thought I wanted to do. And I was an okay student. I wasn't an amazing student. You know, I sort of look now and think, you know, sometimes you think to yourself, what if had I have applied myself a little bit more? But I obtained my VCE, didn't get amazing scores. I really enjoyed maths, geography, and business studies. Ironically, business studies as well. So that was sort of my favourite subjects. As I said, I did okay. I don't know how, but I decided when I left school I wanted to be a school teacher. And because even back then, you know, that's going back, telling my age now, 30 years plus. What have I been in retail? 32 years. So yeah. You know, 30 years plus, and even back then, the need for male teachers was high, as it is now. In fact, it's probably even worse now.
You get a job with Stuart for Computer Explorers.
Yeah. But so I put all my preferences in, and I don't know how, but I actually got my 8th preference, which was school teaching at Ballarat.
Oh,
like,
wow.
Ballarat's the coldest place on earth. I'm not going there.
Yeah.
So I decided to turn it down.
Oh, right.
So I actually turned it down and thought, okay, you know, we'll just sort of see what happens.
And did your mum say, you got to get a job now, mate?
Well, she did. And you know what? Probably one of the most, I don't know if embarrassing is the right word, but my mum told me, you have to go and apply for a job, but you also have to go and apply for the dole. Like if you're not going to get a job and you're not going to go to university, you have to go and apply for the dole. So on the same day that I went to Centrelink, I don't know if it was even called Centrelink back then, it was just, I don't know why, but it was just this awful feeling when I walked in and applied for that. So on the same day, I went and applied for 3 different jobs. I went and applied to push shopping trolleys at Coles. I went and applied.
Had you had a part-time job at this stage?
I had actually, in Berwick, there used to be a very well-known restaurant called Clover Cottage, which was a real premium high-end restaurant there. And when I was a kid through year 11 and 12, I used to go there on a Sunday morning and set tables. So I'd go there and set tables for Sunday lunch service, vacuum the floor, set the tables, do some dishes occasionally, help out in the kitchen doing some dishes. But that was about it. Gave me a little bit of cash. That was sort of all I needed to get through. Yeah, all those years ago. Good cashy. And then so I applied for pushing shopping trolleys at Coles. I applied as a salesperson at Speed Shoes.
Yep.
At Fountain Gate. So both of those were at Fountain Gate because that was the closest to me back then. So from Berwick to Fountain Gate and no licence because I only turned 18 after I finished year 12, sort of 6 months after I finished. So I had no licence. I would have had to catch the bus.
I bet you played a bit of golf over that summer.
I did.
What was you get the handicap? Was that your lowest handicap?
Probably, yeah. I was playing equivalent to sort of high single digits, so I can't do that anymore.
Yeah, no, your mum's like, okay, the party's over.
Time for a job. And then I applied for a role at Barbecues Galore.
Yeah.
Which ironically, I ended up getting all 3 jobs.
Jeez.
And I just had to choose which one. So I said no to the Speed Shoes job, and a good mate of mine got that role. I said no to pushing trolleys at Coles and ended up at Barbecues Galore. And
you're in retail.
And then I was in retail and I thought, you know what, this will do until I know what I really want to do. And
have you figured it out
years later, I'm still in retail. My wife actually said to me about 15 years ago, don't you think it's time to stop saying, you know, this is what I'll do until I figure it out? She said, I reckon you figured it out because you're really good at it. I went, okay, sure. So,
and were you just on the floor, just selling?
Yeah, just a casual salesperson selling on the floor. Learned a lot, and I think that really taught me a number of skills, whether it be from a people perspective and managing people, because we had a diverse mix of people that worked in that store. And I was the youngest. I was only 17 when I started there, and I was only a casual, but, lucky enough, I was working 40 hours a week, all the public holidays, all that sort of stuff. So the money was good, right? I was 17 working 40 hours a week as a casual.
Selling and a passion for the product,
money.
Yeah.
You cooked the product was great, and but I learned a lot about people. But I learned very early on, the old saying in sales: "Don't judge a book by its cover." I learned that really, really early, which was great for me.
Good lesson.
Because these guys would walk in with shorts, t-shirts, and a pair of thongs on, and would buy the most expensive barbecue without blinking an eye. And in sales, I always say start at the top and come down. But as a 17-year-old kid, when you don't necessarily understand the value of money, it's hard. Like back then, the most expensive barbecue was, $2,500, and that was in the early 90s. So it was like, how could someone afford that?
Yeah.
Back then. But it really taught me that lesson early too, which was important.
What did your mum do, if you don't mind me asking?
So my mum worked in Coles, and then she also, in her later working years, was a kindergarten assistant.
Right.
So I worked in kindergartens.
So she liked that teaching side as well.
Yeah, she did.
Retail and
she enjoyed that a
education.
lot.
Yeah.
So and my dad was a Boilermaker, fitter and turner, and a Boilermaker. But I didn't sort of connect with my dad for a long time, and then reconnected about 12, 13 years ago.
That's nice.
It's been we've got an amazing relationship.
Oh, that's
which
cool.
is great. So, and he's got 2 daughters from his second marriage, and
wow.
So there's 6 of you.
Amazing. Yeah, he's got 6 kids. Everything from 32 to 55. My brother is. So he's got a good range in between.
I bet you there's a few stories in that
little
story.
There is.
Yeah, that's great.
So
barbecues. So how old are you? Are you 50?
In 3 weeks, yes. Mate, can't wait. I cannot wait.
Good on you. I'm 56, so that it was about that time. The barbecue, they were pretty strong at that time.
Yeah, they were
really strong.
Yeah, they were still family owned.
They're still pretty strong.
They are. Yeah, they're growing. Their previous CEO that just moved on, Angus McDonald, did an amazing job with that business. And his time with the business really changed the look and feel of the stores and the direction of the business. So
great time
and I've still got a
it.
passion for that business, funny as it sounds.
Yeah.
Every time I walk in there, there's just this feeling of comfort. I spent 13 years there.
Jeez.
I spent the first 13 years of my career at Barbecues Galore, and
were
there's this
they
level
all
of comfort.
Company owned? Were they?
No, there was a mixture of both. There was from memory, about 60 company owned stores nationally, and then there was a number of licensee stores. So they weren't franchisees; they were licensees.
Okay.
Licensee stores.
So how were trading as Barbecues Galore? Though?
Yes. Yep.
Sounds like a franchise system.
Well, yes. It does.
But how many of those was there, do you think, licensees?
I can't really remember. I didn't have a lot to do with it back then, but probably 20, 25, somewhere around there. And they were mainly in those sort of real regional, locations primarily.
So was the 13 years in the same store?
No. One of the things I suppose in my career that I'm the proudest of is I've always managed to grow within each organisation that I've been in, progress, and be promoted. So I started at Dandenong. The store at Dandenong's not actually there anymore. It's now a Peugeot dealer. I think it was on Dandenong Road there, just down past Bourne and Holden. So I started there, spent some time there, moved to Ringwood, spent some time at the Ringwood store, then moved to Richmond, and then from Richmond I did a tiny little stint in supermarkets, so for about 3 months. Then I went back, and then I ended up getting my first management appointment as an assistant store manager at Fountain Gate, because Fountain Gate was about to open. And I lived in Berwick, right?
Yeah, so you're back.
It is the shortest commute.
Away,
It's the shortest commute I've ever had in my working career. It was 4 minutes if the traffic was good, or it was 7 minutes if it was peak hour. So I did that, and then from there opened the store at Knox City, and then went on to manage the store at Richmond, which was the biggest store by footprint in the company, and second biggest in turnover. And then, at that point...
So you're still in your late 20s?
Yeah. And
managing stores? Yeah.
And then at that point, won their store manager of the year when I was there, which sent me to the US for the first time to attend their store managers conference over there for 3 weeks, which was awesome.
And how many staff would you had in that store, like the store manager?
About 15 or 16, mainly casual. So we had a couple of full-timers. So there was a store manager, assistant manager with like a full-time warehouse person. and then a couple of full-time salespeople. But the rest was casual, right? Because of the seasonality of that business. Come Father's Day, that business just bang took off. So around Father's Day, which was when you were recruiting heavily, and those days as well taught me a lot about recruitment and recruiting people and how to recruit people. We were lucky enough; we had a lady who was very senior at Walmart in Canada, came to Australia and worked for another business to start with, but then took up a training role with Barbecues Galore. And what I learned from her around people management and around, you talk about sort of key people throughout your career. She was one of those from a people perspective and a training and learning and development perspective. And then the regional manager that I worked under at Barbecues Galore was another mentor of mine that taught me the whole finer detail of store management, everything from merchandising to financial and all that sort of stuff. But, for me, I learned really quickly that, when you recruit people, particularly casuals, full-timers are a little bit different, but particularly casuals, and lots of people talk about it and say it, but, when you're really just looking at someone's personality, because you know what, I can teach them how to sell something, I can teach them all the product knowledge in the world, but I can't give them an attitude and I can't give them a personality. So if they can sit opposite me in an interview as a complete stranger, as they would with every customer that walks in the door, and have an easy, open conversation with me. Little side note, that's actually how I met my wife, but we'll come back to that later.
Just write that
down. They got a job.
Yeah.
Because I can teach them the other things, but I can't give them an attitude, right? I can't change their attitude.
The sales is interesting that you say that, because obviously so many retail, but sales is just so key for people coming through, and whether it be in franchising generally, like fitness franchises, whatever,
everything.
Every part of retail is sales is interesting, and you're bringing casual people through that we've both got teenage kids, and so have you. They just grunt at you for a period of time, and so you've got to get them past the grunting stage and into selling. Yep. So, but you think you can teach that as long as they can have a conversation.
Yep.
You can teach the selling part.
Particularly at Barbecues Galore. So we had a very robust sales cycle. It was, here's the 18 steps, and you must follow them to the letter of the law, because we had mystery shopping. People would come in to mystery shop us, and it would be mystery shopped to the sales cycle, to the letter. And you know what? If you followed the cycle and ticked all the boxes, then, you did really well, and the business was successful.
Who owned Barbecues Galore? It
was privately owned at the time. Yeah, it was privately owned by a gentleman by the name of Sam Lins when I was there. Originally from South Africa.
Yeah.
And there was another family involved, but I can't. It was remiss of me. Apologies, guys, for missing what that was. And then at about the time I left Galore, it got taken over by private equity through Ironbridge Capital at the time.
Okay.
Was it about the time I left that business?
Yeah.
Ironbridge?
What about Walmart? I am interested in Walmart, because obviously, the biggest department store in the world now, aren't they? I don't know. They sort of, besides Amazon, like obviously bricks and mortar stores. They've done a lot of things right, and how they've done. So the learnings that you got, not only is it on a personal level from her, wasn't it, as a mentor,
Yep.
but were there things that the Walmart systems and processes that she brought to the business, or was more just on a personal level?
Not specifically. I think it was more on a personal level, just to be able to talk about this is what they did and this is what made them successful. And then, some of those things around, the sales cycle and the management training cycle, there was a very clear path, I suppose, to management, because there was level 1 sales training, and to the point where you couldn't actually go on the sales floor as a new starter. You couldn't go on the sales floor for the first 2 days because you had to learn the sales cycle, you had to learn how to answer the phone, you couldn't even engage with a customer. Until you ticked all the boxes and the store manager had signed off your level 1 induction. You couldn't even go on the floor and engage with a customer. And then from there, you had a very clear path of, if you wanted to be a manager, where you had to complete level 2, 3, and 4 to then be to go into a management type role, which then gave you the skills in different things, whether it be financials or whatever it might be. So she brought in some really, really robust processes.
I think that's I grew up in retail as well, which my grandfather had supermarkets and dad had supermarkets and stuff. And it's interesting, 2 things. One is people don't think of retail as a career, still.
I didn't.
Yeah, and they don't. And so I'm interested in your thoughts on that. But before that, like, I actually think, like, I ended up in law, and I became part of recruitment processes for lawyers. And lawyers often are, do well in school, do well at university, get through. But if they haven't worked in a sales role or a retail role, they often struggle a bit because law's the same. You've got to sell the services. So people don't just come to you. And so I always found that whether it be McDonald's in food or whether it be in, large retail formats, the training that you get helped. It helps all kids get through, and it's really important for kids to have those experiences in part-time. And so obviously you've learned that from 17.
Yeah.
So how do you think how do retailers make that more attractive? I know it's a difficult one, but it's not seen, coming through school, whether it be sales or retail or whatever, like it's a really good, and particularly, we're going to get to franchising in a sec, but you get to own a business, and I was talking to one of your competitors yesterday in Scott Eno about kids. He's got teenage kids as well, and if you just have a job, it's pretty hard to move forward and buy a house and all those things the way the property market is. So how do we make retail sexy for kids coming out of school?
It's an interesting question because, as I said, I felt like I fell into it. And as I said, for 15 or 20 years of my career, I kept saying, this is just what I'm doing until I decide what I'm going to do. Until my wife, shook me one day and said, as I said before, you're great at it. Just keep doing it and, look at different opportunities. There is lots of opportunity for growth within sales, and I think that's the beauty of sales. I think you get into some businesses or some industries where there's not great opportunity for growth. What better way than to spend your day engaging with different people all day, every day, and understanding different people and their lives, and just, every day is totally different. Every customer that walks in the door is totally different. You're not doing the same thing day in, day out. And I think there's this amazing sense of satisfaction that when you close a sale with a customer, knowing you've sold the customer exactly what they need, and which takes time and takes understanding to understand, to ask the right discovery questions of the customer. Which was one of the things we learned at Barbecues Galore a lot. And I talk about that a lot because that's where I learnt my selling skills and the process, right? The foundation for that. Tick all those boxes, and that amazing sense of satisfaction at the end when a customer walks out with exactly what they want. And then, we're in a business where customers had to keep coming back on a regular basis, whether that was for gas fills or whatever it might be, or they'd come and look at outdoor furniture or whatever, and you'd really create this rapport with customer and relationships that, lasted a long time. So I think
it's a lost art, really. It's becoming a lost art.
It is indeed.
It's really that it's just so critical. It's so nice to hear you say that, because it's refreshing when you actually go into a store and someone's, you're being sold to when you know how to do it, and you think, shit, they're actually following the process, or they're thinking about, how am I going to sell to this person? And that is rare as rocking horse shit.
Yeah, but I think the way what he said to that is, the person's come into the store, right? So they're buying something that they want. So finding the right. So you're not selling them shit they don't need.
No,
but I think that's the thing. But that approach, that's right. So people are coming into the store, like you haven't hijacked, haven't kidnapped them. They've come into the store. They're just making a selection, and your job is to find them the right product what they're after. So I guess understanding your product that you're selling, having a bit of a passion for it would be helpful. Like if you're interested in the product that you're selling, but even if you're not, you're interested in people.
Yes.
So you're interested in what they're interested, like what suits them, and understanding your customer.
Those qualifying questions are really critical.
Yeah. So you
instead of texting them.
Yes.
But what about, so you mentioned groceries. So I think you spent a bit of time at Masters.
I did. Yeah. After I actually got a phone call when I was at Barbecues Galore from the MD of Clive Peeters. They wanted to have a chat, so I went from Barbecues Galore to Clive Peeters.
Yep.
Spent 6.5 years there in electrical retail.
Yep.
Which was good. It was my
What's
first
the Peters?
head
Was it
office role.
Clive Peeters was
Clive
the family?
Peeters.
Was he the
no, it
owner?
was owned by Clive Savage and Peter Peters, I think.
Yeah.
From memory, that's where the name came from.
Bigger stores,
and then
a lot bigger stores,
much
a lot
bigger
more
stores.
SKUs.
Yeah. Yes, a lot more SKUs, a lot more diversity.
Yeah.
Higher average transaction value, much higher turnover.
Managing stores or managing?
No, that was my first head office role, my first operations
with the
role.
big dog.
Yeah. So I went into operations, so supporting their stores with, merchandising and all those sort of day-to-day operational type stuff, merchandising and standards in particular. But I also used to run all their warehouse sales for them. So when they used to have the big warehouse sales and stuff. So engaging with suppliers and
big logistics,
doing, layouts and hiring marquees and big tents and then laying it all out and setting it all up and, working with the marketing team,
How
etc.
far away from home was this office, by the way?
So that was in Bayswater. So that was a bit not close. I've never
Not
been
too
close.
bad.
And you know what?
Longer than 4 minutes.
Yeah, correct. And that's just what you accept when you live in Pakenham, right? You've just got to accept that, that's the way it is. When I was there, that's when I really first started travelling interstate. I did a little bit of travel with Barbecues Galore, and that was when I really first started travelling interstate and looking after.
And just for our interstate listeners, Bayswater, there's no bay.
No, there's not.
Or any
there
water.
actually isn't. It's out in the eastern suburbs, stuck in a landlocked suburb. It is.
Yeah, nowhere near it.
Lots of factories.
So
yes, there
6 years there, 7 years.
6 years there before, unfortunately, they went into administration.
I
Which
thought
is
someone bought them out. Did
no,
they
which
went
is-
down?
They
did
went.
they?
Yeah, they got bought out by Harvey Norman
Right.
because they were their kitchen business, their cooking appliance business was massive. They had a massive market share, well above. They were batting well above their weight in market share. It was like, from memory, it was like 35% market share in cooking appliances, even over Harvey's and all that sort of stuff at the
That's
time.
massive.
And there was only 40 stores. Might not have even been. I can't even remember, to be honest.
So what did you learn at head office? What was your first, what were some of the good bits about moving out off the floor into head office?
Sorry, were they all company owned as well?
Yes, they
Yeah.
were.
Oh, sorry.
Relationships.
Yep. With the
Biggest
store
one.
managers?
Yep.
Yep. So you didn't have franchisees, but you've got store
No,
managers.
Store
So-
managers, right?
Yep.
And I don't know if I'm allowed to say this or not, but in the electrical industry, big egos as well, right? That's just the nature of the electrical industry.
Why do you reckon
Electrical
that's different from other
appliances.
retail?
I think because of the size of the businesses.
Yeah.
Some of these businesses are turning
There's a
over
lot of-
$20-30 million
Per store.
in electrical retail per store.
Yep.
So they're big stores, lots of staff, 40, 50 staff. So they're big businesses. And a lot of these guys that are store managers at the time had come up through sales. So really good salespeople that became sales managers that became store managers. But yeah, relationships and just getting them to understand that I could talk their language. And I knew what it was to run a business because I'd been running, retail stores.
Yeah, well,
So-
I think that's interesting because, I guess, roll it forward into franchising, and you've run a big franchise group. That role of the area manager, if they haven't worked in the industry, the credibility piece, of franchise,
Helps.
of franchisees saying, well, what do you know? Because you don't run a store, you don't really know. Whereas I guess you've come through the ranks, and so you've got that, even though in a different
Earned your
business.
stripes.
In a different business.
Yeah.
How many times did you say, when I was at Barbecues Galore?
Oh, yeah. And do you know what? I still talk about it today.
Yeah.
Interestingly, I still talk about it today. So, even when my first, might be skipping ahead, but my first foray into franchise was Office Choice,
Yeah.
right? When I joined Office Choice. And I remember the CEO at the time, still his Brad O'Brien, invited me to a board dinner. So we're having a board meeting a couple of weeks before I started. He said, look, come to the board dinner, meet the board, et cetera, et cetera. And I still remember one of the board members after dinner, he'd had a few beers, but that's okay. After dinner, sort of got me in the corner of a room where we were having a drink, and he said to me, Jamie, what do you know about business? What are you going to do for me? How are you going to help me in my business? And it was really interesting because, all they'd seen is I'd come from corporate, Masters, Clive Peeters, Barbecues Galore. Some people fail to remember that Barbecues Galore was a family-owned business when I worked there, and it was you were allowed to treat your store exactly the same way. So you had full control over everything from finance to people to stock. You know, it was like run the business, Jamie, as if it's your own.
Genuine store manager.
And it's similar, except, you know, you didn't have to put your hand in your pocket every day, and you didn't have to figure out where the money was coming from to pay the bills, you know. So it was just a conversation around that, yes, I've worked in a family-type business. And, you know, at the end of the day, because I joined at the time as the National Sales and Operations Manager, and, again, it was just about relationships. So how do you build relationships with the franchisees? How do you sit and listen was the most important thing, right? So in that first 3 to 6 months in particular, when I visited the stores, it was just sit and listen. You know, tell me, what do we do? What are we doing well? You know, what are we not doing well? What do you need help with? How do we support you?
Empathy.
All those things, right? First, before going, oh, by the way, no, you need to do this now and you need to do that. Similar to where I am now.
A couple. I did mention Masters because I was just wanted to talk about a couple of your roles.
Yes.
Because I don't know what they actually are. So the business improvement specialist role, moving into a national retail format improvement specialist.
Yes.
How did that go for you? Those titles in a business that didn't actually go that well. So you were trying to improve the Masters business.
Yeah.
That ultimately didn't improve. So what did you learn through that journey?
Oh, it was interesting because I started there as a sales and operations manager. So it was like a 2IC role, and the stores were split in two. So there was a soft and a hard side of the business. The stores were split in two, and then I moved into a store manager's role. So I actually opened the store at Hawthorn.
Yep.
There, which was a massive challenge. 150 staff. I had to start from scratch. There was just me. I had to go and find my own hiring office. I had to then go and recruit 150 staff, and then from there, moved on to multiple different roles, but primarily it was about improving process. And that role in particular, a lot of it was focused around stock management. And, we had a lot of stock and a lot of the wrong stock. And, even, I heard stories there when I started that, the warehouse in Melbourne was, when they did some of their first orders in certain categories in the business, filled like 40% of the warehouse in a category that was going to be 5% of the.
So that they've got a lot of things wrong, and so and that's not understanding their customer or not understanding how to manage inventory or a bit of both.
No, look, my personal opinion on it was that from a marketing perspective, they struggled to get the customer to turn left instead of right. Because in most instances, a Masters store was built near a Bunnings store.
Yeah, so they took them on.
And ironically, in a number of locations, Bunnings closed a store down that might have been on the other side of town and built a new one next to the Masters store. Bunnings did that across multiple locations.
So it was a war between two big dogs.
Pretty much. And the reason why they went there is because into that industry, into home improvement, is because they sent a senior leadership team from Woolworths all around the globe to find a different category that we could be in and what succeeded around the globe. And in most instances, there was at least two large big box home improvement businesses everywhere they went. The UK, the US, they had two large format home improvement businesses. So that's why they decided to start it here. And the feedback from the customers was amazing. The stores were clean, they were air conditioned. We didn't have the same range as Bunnings. I think one of the challenges was early days is we couldn't get that trade customer.
But didn't you focus on different areas to try and
we did a little bit. We focused on kitchens.
Yeah, kitchens.
Which Bunnings doing a lot of now.
Yeah,
kitchens, white goods, those sorts of things is where it was. Where a lot of the focus was that was a little bit different.
Which was taken on Harvey Norman at the time as well.
And it's interesting because we had a massive lighting department. So, we used to ask a lot of time to our new staff who were our competitors, and they'd go, Bunnings. But, they'd forget about Beacon Lighting, they'd forget about Harvey Norman, and they'd forget about the flooring, the standalone flooring industry, because we had all of that. We're in all those categories. Look, I think, to be honest, it was as I said, a failure of getting that mindset changed by the customer. Because what was really interesting is when Woolworths announced that they were pulling out of home improvement. I was at that time, I was sort of back in stores, and you would stand there at the front door as the people greeter, just for a bit of fun, and foot traffic went through the roof. People would walk in the door and they'd be like, "Oh, wow, this is amazing." Be like, "Yeah, it's nice, isn't it?" And they'd be like, "Well, I don't understand why you're closing." And you'd be, "Well, have you been in before?" No, we haven't." "Well, that's why we're closing." And they'd be like, "What do you mean?" And we're like, "Well, why didn't you give us a chance before? Now everything's on clearance, everything's heavily reduced. You're coming into the store. But prior to that, you never gave us a chance, right? Because A, it's about habit, and then B, it's about, as I said before, from a marketing perspective, changing the mindset to turn left instead of right. But the feedback, sales went through the roof, foot traffic went through the roof. It was all the things that we needed 12 months before that to keep the business successful.
It's always going to be tough. It was a dramatic cultural change from shop. That the Bunnings name is almost, that was the hardware store, regardless of the name. You were going down to Bunnings. Yeah, it's pretty tough to come back from. But a mate of mine did all the selling of the Masters product. A guy from the States, Great American. I don't know if you ever came across them. They were the ones that was doing all the sell down of all the product.
Right. Okay.
And that was fairly profitable going out, which is a shame. But there were some fundamental mistakes in that.
Yeah, there was.
So you were there right at when it was decided, the announcement was made, and
the announcement was made in the January. I ended up getting a role. Ironically, for Office Choice, I ran into Brad O'Brien in a Qantas lounge in Sydney at the airport, and I was on the phone, and he came up and said hello, and I hadn't seen, because I worked with him at Clive Peeters. Yeah. So many years before that, we hadn't seen each other. And he just gave me a business card and he said, "Give me a call," because I was on the phone.
You had the bad experience at Masters, and he had added a Retrovision.
Well, yeah, because I think he'd gone from Clive Peeters to Retrovision. I'm not 100% sure. I can't really
dodged
remember.
a bullet. Both of he got out of Retrovision as it was falling down too.
And Clive Peeters, I worked only for probably 3 to 6 months at Clive Peeters with Brad before we moved on from memory. And he said, "Give me a call," and rang me, and I was sort of I didn't really know what I wanted to do at that stage. I thought, because of the work I'd been doing at Masters, that I wanted to get into like a merchandise role, get away from operations and do something a little bit different. But he said, "Look, I've got this operations role that I need filling. Would you be interested?" And the rest is history, as they say. So
7 years of, ended up the COO, sort of his right-hand man in the business, and, in a business of 130 odd, locations.
142 stores.
Yeah. That's great. And so it's a really good business, and a franchise model essentially across the top of it, but with an ownership with all the stores. So where they all had an ownership in head office?
They were
at the start.
We had 2 tiers of membership. Yeah. The top tier were all shareholders. Yeah. In Office Choice. Yeah.
So they were, so which is interesting because
all equal shareholders.
They're all equal shareholders, so they all have a say.
Same share parcel and same value, and they all had voting rights. Yeah, and they all had rights to nominate for a seat on the board.
So it worked for a few, because I did some work for the Retrovision as well, and a lot of those models might attempt, like where the franchisees, licensees, whatever you wanted to call them, were also owners. Which you've got a similar thing now,
So is that a small percentage that they owned, and did they own like 20% and however many stores?
No, they had it all.
They owned the whole lot.
Yeah. Yep. So between them,
right?
Yeah, there was a certain number
they
of
were buying
shares.
Really?
Yeah. Effectively, that's how they started, as a buying group, and then in the end ticked all the franchise boxes and ended up becoming a franchise. Over. Yeah.
Okay.
So that's the challenge of that is obviously, the franchisee-franchisor relationship's one thing, but when your franchisees are also ultimately your boss. Yeah. Because, that you're driving shareholder returns at head office level, so they're interested in their store.
So did it work well?
Yeah, it did. Yeah, it did work well. But it became a bit of a challenge at board level because people just weren't interested. Too much time, whatever. And we had really regular board meetings, so they were like every 6 weeks. So to give up time to do a board
and they're all
meeting
focused on their stores.
Yeah, they are, because most of them are mum and dad businesses, right? The guys that were on the board primarily had the bigger businesses. They had teams of people running their business for them when they weren't there. They had that flexibility to be able to get out. whereas a lot of them were just, husband and wife businesses, maybe with one other staff member. So the time to get out wasn't as easy.
And a stint of consulting and working across other businesses. So you're a business owner now.
Oh, technically I was.
You're a business owner.
As a consultant, started my own business. And
So,
ironically, consulting back to Office Choice.
Yeah.
But also to one of their franchisees as well.
Did you have other clients out of the industry, or were you just pretty much?
Just
so your
folks that
own,
kept me busy.
your entrepreneurial. You hadn't wanted to be a franchisee in all of the other roles. So you're consulting world, but then now back it. And then the CEO position at Floorworld. So how's, like an older brand that's been around for a long time, well-established brand in the marketplace, following someone who'd been in the industry a long time as well, similar structure with board, franchisees?
Yes.
Having an ownership?
Well, the board are also the shareholders.
Yeah.
So there's only 7 shareholders in the business.
Yeah.
Which are also the directors.
Yeah, and also have stores.
Yes, they have stores,
Yeah,
which is a requirement. So they have to have a store to be a director and a shareholder.
Yep.
Look, the business, we're going into our 34th year this year.
Yep.
I replaced Bob, who'd been in the role for 22 years before me. And, what was really interesting, and I'm allowed to tell this story, but it's not actually the role that I applied for. I didn't actually apply for a CEO's role. I was consulting and I was out and about actively looking.
And had a couple of things that didn't go as well as planned, but we won't.
No, best not go there. That's for sure.
Something about chocolate.
Minutes.
Chocolate? No.
I'd actually applied for a different role. I'd applied for a national sales role, and when I met the independent director on the board who was doing the recruitment, we had a bit of a chat, and I met with Bob, and then I met with the chairman of the board and one of the other directors, and in the end, they said, look, Bob's looking at retiring and we think you'd be the perfect replacement for him. So they offered me the CEO role, which was an amazing surprise. It was interesting because people say to me, have you always aspired to be a CEO? And through my 30 years, you talk, when you get an opportunity to speak to CEOs and senior people, CEOs in particular say it's the loneliest job in the world, right? If you don't have the support network around you, it's a really lonely job. So it was something I actually hadn't necessarily been 100% focused on. When I got the COO role at Office Choice, I spent a lot of time working with Brad and directly with the board. So that's where I started to get that board engagement and, looking at the business at a different level. And I thought, you know what, this is a good role because I've still got the CEO to bounce ideas and thoughts off, et cetera, et cetera. But I'm extremely lucky where I am. I have an amazing support network, not only in the executive team and the business, but also with the board. Those guys ring me all the time. I ring them. It's a really easy conversation. And I don't feel lonely at all.
And you're still in retail, but slightly different.
Still in retail.
Carpet, so a bit different from what you've done. Yeah, flooring. Yeah. Oh, yeah, flooring more generally. Yeah.
For me, people talk a lot about what does growth look like for them throughout their career. And growth for me is a different industry. At the end of the day, on day one when I walked into the Floorworld business, the principles of business are the same. Right? It doesn't really matter what you're running. When it comes to retail, the principles of business are the same. The product and the industry is different. So I've been in role now 16 months, 17 months. And you know what? I've got 400 product experts that can talk to me about products. So I don't need to delve into the product anymore. I'm learning from time to time because we're doing a renovation at home.
You went on a couple of junkets to learn a bit more about it, didn't you?
I went on some study tours, Bruce.
Study tours.
Thank you. Europe and China. So for me, it's, growth is about a different industry. This is very much a different industry, highly competitive. No doubt the conversations you would have had with Scott over the time about how highly competitive it is. And, compared to some of the other franchise networks, we've only got, in a couple of weeks' time, it'll be 48 stores nationally. But, we've done that on purpose as a business over the time. The board have been very purposeful to make sure that we bring the right business owner that's a right cultural fit for our group. I used to talk about it all the time at Office Choice, and it wasn't necessarily like this, but to these exact numbers, but I used to say to the board all the time, I'd much prefer 100 compliant franchisees than 140 with 40 that aren't and are a thorn in my side, right? Because let's face it, small business owners hate the F&C words, franchise and compliance. They don't like them. But that's just the nature of the beast that they have to deal with from day to day. But again, because we started as a buying group, we still behave as one. We have a very fair franchise agreement. It's very balanced franchise agreement. I've been working with Bruce and Jane and the BDC team recently. Just brought the team on board to help us at Floorworld. But it's been good though. And we'll be 50 by the end of the calendar year, ideally. So
looking at your growth strategy, is it around new sites or around conversions, or what's a bit of both?
There's not too many people that wake up every morning, Bruce, and go, I'm going to open a flooring store
today,
right? Because it's not really we don't offer anyway a turnkey solution. Primarily ours are conversions. Although, having said that, we've done 1, 2, 3, 4 greenfield sites in the last 12 months. So Mornington, Clyde. We did one up in just out of Rockhampton in Yeppoon. We're about to do one in Brisbane as well.
Where's
in the next couple of weeks. Mornington Tyre Road, near Carpet World.
Oh yeah, yeah.
In that, right in the right strip.
Yeah,
it's in the right strip. So most of it I think will be conversions. One of the things that we've also done, I spent time early last year really looking at our IT systems, and as a business we've heavily invested in IT over the last 12 months, more money than the business has ever invested. And one of those is with Gap Maps. So we brought Gap Maps on board, and the guys have done the work for us based on the data that we've given them for our existing stores. They've gone out and given us another 40 locations that we can target. So now it's, moving forward, it's going to be very strategic where we go. And primarily it'll be converting, independents more so. The focus is not going to be on converting existing franchises. A lot of independents still out there? Yeah, there's still a large
a significant amount?
There's still a large number.
The bigger section?
They'd be half probably.
Okay.
Half of the.
And one of the things in your industry, as well as lots of industries, is around succession plan and the aging profile of your franchisees. So when you're looking at conversion, are you looking at their succession as well? So they're thinking, well, they've had the family flooring store for years, Jamie's flooring, is it getting into the brand that helps them to sell it by being part of a group, or is it,
Yeah, that's part of the story when you talk to independents. We've been to different independent businesses that have been around for 50 years, as an independent and spoken to them. And one of our success stories is a business out of Cairns, Hoppin's Floorworld up there in Cairns. They're a big player in Cairns, a very big, very successful business. And Wayne's dad opened that business 51 years ago. And after they've been operating independently for 45, 46 years, Wayne decided, I need a brand. So he ended up coming to Floorworld, and that conversation, as sometimes happens, right, with those conversion conversations, sometimes they take 6 weeks, sometimes they take 3 years. This was one of those 3-year ones because it was through COVID as well, at the start of COVID. But decided as a smart businessman, decided, for me to sell this business in the future, it needs to have a brand and it needs to have a group that's going to support a new owner coming to the business, or whether it be one of his management team or whether somebody comes in and buys the business in the future. They need that support network. And at the same time, it's about how does he go and not divorce himself from the business, but, he's Wayne Hoppin and he owns Hoppin's Floorworld. How do I start to step away from the business? And, the business is then not heavily reliant on me every day. So when that time comes, when that time comes, it's not just about me. Yeah. It's about my team, and my team are doing, 90, 95% of the work instead of me doing 50%. And we've got some businesses out there at the moment like that. The owners are doing 80% of the business and the rest of the team are doing the 20%. So it's really heavily reliant, on the business owner. So
we're going to finish in a minute. So I'm going to get some tips from you on, for franchisors. But before we do that, obviously the retail and franchising environment's been pretty challenging. Like we came, we had COVID, so you weren't in the current business during COVID, but it was terrible for retailers at the start. Then we came out of it and everyone had a bit of money in their pocket because they hadn't spent it all. And so I know the industry went pretty well for a while coming out of COVID, and then all of a sudden interest rates went up and people had already fixed their house up and they put their new flooring in and stuff. So it was I imagine the actual stores have had a challenging 12 to 18 months when you've been in the business that hopefully is coming out. What do you see as the next sort of 12 to 18 months? How are your stores performing now, and are they optimistic about it, or are they still a bit nervous because what's been happening?
Yeah, I think one of the things for our business that we're very lucky with is our stores have a very large network of customers. So they're not necessarily just relying on the B2C mum and dad consumer that's walking in the door. They have a strong network of business, and we have a really strong commercial business. So a lot of our guys deal with, commercial builders, and whether that be multi-res, whatever that looks like. And that's still going well. Like, multi-res development and all those sorts of things is still really strong. And it's a really big percentage of our business. One of the guys that I work with, the national ops manager, he spent a number of years with another one of the flooring groups. And he said that, our percentage of business in that commercial space is considerably higher than they had. So, as I said, we're lucky enough, I suppose, that the guys are doing that. And then on the back of our existing stores are somewhat flat, so they're not in decline, which is really positive. I put in against the trend, without giving too much away, I put in a very robust budget this year. A couple of people gave me some strange looks when I submitted my budget, but that was on the back of new stores, existing stores being somewhat flat, new stores, and new suppliers as well coming into the business.
And a big push to fix housing shortages as well, surely. I mean, is that? Well, they'd probably the government money to have their own government contractors.
Yeah, a lot of it's sort of locked up with different. The big home builders are locked up with different suppliers at the moment. Some are bringing their own in, whatever it might be. So, but there's a fair bit of money around the Queensland. Queensland in particular, at the moment, is booming. Unfortunately, on the back of the cyclone that they had 18 months ago, nearly now in Cairns, up in Far North Queensland, the recent rains and everything in Townsville. We've got a store in Toowoomba. Townsville,
Goldie now.
I say unfortunately, but, that then leads to business for us,
Floods.
for our stores.
Yeah.
So it's about, those relationships they have with the insurance companies and with the insurance builders, and our guys have got really strong relationships.
Yeah.
And then over the next 7 years with the Olympics in 2032 in Brisbane, there's Cairns will be part of that, Townsville will be part of that, particularly from a sporting perspective.
Yeah, the Sunshine Coast, there's all sorts of stuff.
Yeah, so for those guys, and when I spoke about Wayne before, when Wayne joined in Cairns, he was the second store in Queensland, and we're about to open our 11th in Queensland in 4 years. And because of him, I think he's he's like the quiet mayor of Cairns. And
but also having a
Queensland.
franchisee success is the best way to recruit other franchisees.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So if you've got an advocate in your group who can talk about rebranding, the benefits of being part of the brand and stuff.
Particularly after 45 plus years, right?
Yeah.
I've done it. I've been there. Not me, but Wayne. He sits there. I travel with him, and we go and sit with some businesses that have been independent for 60 years. They've had multiple owners in that time, but the business has been independent for 60 years. Why do I need to change? And to have somebody that's been through it certainly makes that conversation a little bit easier.
Yeah, absolutely.
You don't always get everyone, but it certainly makes the conversation easier.
So as a career retailer, we'll take you out of retail into franchising more generally. We catch up regularly with people in all sorts of areas of franchising, but a lot of the people we talk to in the podcast are emerging franchisors or people thinking of franchising. Yep. What sort of tips have you got for those franchisors?
Look, I think the biggest one for me is about making sure that the franchisees you pick are the right cultural fit for your brand. As I said, that's been one of the successes for Floorworld over the time, and it will be moving forward. To have robust systems in place, for them as well, to support them, and to have a strong operations team that can get out and about, and an operations team that not only sort of understands your brand but can really spend time digging in to the financials. And one of the tough things is when you've got small to medium business owners, they're not that quick to open their books up and say, oh yeah, here you go, have a look, right? It's tough. It's a tough gig. Even for me, when I go into some of our stores now, it's it's still a tough gig to get that. But with the operations guys, again, relationships, building those relationships over time, and then helping them to understand that every single day when the support office team, even though they might not agree with everything we do, every single day when the support office team get out of bed, all they want to do is the right thing by our franchisees, because we're on the same page they are. At the end of the day, our job is to help them to grow, but just as importantly to make sure that they're sustainable into the future, because growth is one thing, but sustainability, is critical for them, and to make sure that, that they understand that, and everything that we do is for them.
And how many corporate golf days do you fit into your calendar now? Charity golf day, in the charity golf days.
Do you want me to hit him? Or
No.
I just saw him out. He did all right. He was just in the local Dandenong paper. I was just doing a bit of Googling. Photo of you in a corporate golf day, a little month.
Played at Commonwealth. Played at Commonwealth a couple of weeks ago, and then Royal Melbourne the week after that.
Yeah, see?
So now I know where he's
doing
going.
Right.
I don't reckon corporate golf days help your handicap.
No, they're terrible.
It's terrible.
You normally have a shocker because you get nervous and you think, I know how to play golf, and then you get up there and shank them and have an absolute disaster sometimes, more often than not.
Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you for listening to the BDC Partners podcast today. If you enjoyed what you heard, don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you, Jamie.
Thanks, Jamie.
Thanks, guys.
Good story, mate. Well done.